So good morning, welcome to KWS Connect, welcome to our Northern focused chat today. We're going to attempt to go through all the content we've got in around about 30 minutes. It should be nice and concise. Your microphones and your webcams are disabled. If you do want to talk to us, look in the left hand side and you'll see a chat function. If you have any questions, please put questions in there. We're only going to focus on what we feel are key products. If there's anything we don't mention, feel free to ask, and there will be a Q&A session at the end. And what I'll do now, I'll introduce today's speakers. So I'm James from KWS. I'm joined by Kirsty Richards, also from KWS, who's going to look at our varieties from an end user marketing perspective. Joined by John Miles, who will learn the technical aspect on our varieties today, and joined by Judy Gold to look at our varieties, also rape varieties. We're joined by two external speakers. So we're joined by Gareth Bubb from Bayer, who's on the call also. He'll be looking at our certain features of our varieties. And Stuart Carpenter from ADM is going to give us an overview of the markets. So without further ado, we'll kick off, and we're going to start with barley. So we're going to talk about one barley variety here. KWS is very famous for their two-row pipeline. We've had great success, and the latest one to the market this season is KWS Hawking. Hawking is a tower cross. It's building on a lot of the success we've had in the past. What we're seeing with Hawking is higher yields than some of the previous varieties, good spec weight, and a much improved disease package on the likes of Orwell. So I think it will be a variety that will be of an appeal. But I mean, John, in terms of agronomics, how does Hawking differ from some of the ones we've seen previously in the market?
Thanks, James. And I think it's two of our varieties plus, really. You can see this is the yield off the recommended list. Imlet, regionally quite important, but not a big variety, very much a light land specialist. And it's a mountain, probably a little bit weaker in the stem than the varieties we'd had before. So Hawking sort of fixes that at that yield level. I think it's fair to say it's not an Orwell, not as stiff as Orwell. And if you look at the data behind it, I think it's, some of the data on the RL I don't really agree with. I think it's more Cassia-esque. I don't think it's as weak as some of the data suggests. But realistically, it's not as stiff as Orwell, but it is a 5 for mildew, whereas obviously Orwell is a 3, but very much a Cassia-esque growth habit and stem stiffness, James.
Thanks, John. What we're going to do now, we're going to play a recording from Stuart because he's not here, and we're going to listen to the barley market.
Slightly better, to be honest, than the situation for Harvest 20, and it's worth just looking at the Harvest 20 first because we're trading at a significant discount to feed wheat, a figure of probably something like 30 to 32 pound discount to feed wheat, purely because of the size of the UK crop this coming harvest with all the spring barley that's in. Going forward to Harvest 21, which is obviously the crops that you're going to be planting this autumn, we're expecting that discount to come down to probably between 10 and 15 pound discount to feed barley. So slightly more positive, but to be honest, it's that far out. There's no market at the moment. It's very thin trade, and we have got all the uncertainty over tariffs and what happens with no deal Brexits.
Stuart. Well, hope you can hear that all okay. I mean, we're going to look now at the wheats. So as I said, that's going to be the only barley we talk about today. If you've got any more questions on the barleys, please put them in the chat and we'll get to them as soon as possible. So we're going to start with Zyatt being a Group 1, and I'm going to pass immediately to Kirsty Richards, who will look at Zyatt from an end-use point of view.
Lovely, thanks very much, James. So KWS Zyatt, as we said, is a Group 1 variety. And the key thing about being a successful Group 1 is being one of the most flexible products you can use in the bakery. If you're a miller or a baker, that's your perspective on what makes a good Group 1. We've done a lot of work on Zyatt over the years. Here's some work that we've done with Sean from Hovis. This is sort of 4 or 5 years work, so across a range of different seasons. And the thing that Hovis in particular have found about Zyatt is it produces this really functional protein. So it's good at obviously getting the level of protein in for the yield, but also it's about the usability from an end use perspective. So really flexible, used across a range of products, and that gives it a big tick. So we fully expect KWS Zyatt to be up there with the Group 1s for a number of years to come. So John, I'll just hand on to you now to talk about Zyatt from an agronomic perspective.
Thanks, Kirsty.
Oh, sorry, actually, my fault. We're now going to hear from Stuart again. He's going to tell us a little bit about the prospects of Group 1s.
Similar situation to barley, as in with 2020, we've got significant premiums. We're looking at premiums in the high 20s for harvest 20. If for the crop that you're planting, so for harvest 21, we've currently got buybacks at a min 15, so still an attractive level. And I think there will be an increase in the area of Group 1 going in, because there'll be an increase of everything. So I think we could well see a significantly larger Group 1 crop harvest 21, and I think if farmers are going to put it in, minimum premiums are well worth looking at.
Okay, so hopefully everyone heard from Stuart there. We're now going to hand over to John, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the agronomics of the varieties that sit in the Group 1 sector.
Okay, so within the Group 1 sector, we've got three key varieties really. We've got Zyatt, we've got Crusoe, and we've got Skyfall. Now this is a table that we do. We're just using the recommended list, treated and untreated, the Septoria score, and rank them. And you can see in the middle, Zyatt is highlighted. Now, yeah, rust has become a bit more of an issue within this group. Some have had it for a while, some have had increasing levels of rust. So that's not, that is ongoing. But I think from our point of view, one of the key challenges will be that the Septoria will probably be one of the key things that we're going to be looking at, and obviously we're going to see, CTL has gone, so the implications are, from our point of view and everybody else's that we get feedback, is that we're going to lean on varieties more here. And what you can see is you've got, this 6.4 from Zyatt, you have a 6.2 from Crusoe, and a 5.8. So whilst there is rust challenges within this group now, then the Septoria is probably the biggest challenge. So I mean, Gareth, from a sort of a Bayer point of view, I mean, we've done work with you before with our trials, and I guess we see a real step change on sort of Septoria control, don't we, with these varieties once we get above a 6, and indeed towards a 6.5.
Yeah, I'd say that's the cut-off, really. You get to 6, and it is a bit, when you go above that and you start going into those 6s and a bit beyond and things, then definitely it definitely helps with the Septoria control. Anything lower than that, and you can be struggling.
I mean, from your point of view, Gareth, I mean, we know we're going to lean on varieties more. There's a bit more challenge on the chemistry. I mean, how do you see the sort of variety chemistry interaction playing out going forward?
I think they rely on each other. I think you can't have one and not the other, so you can't just have the genetics, or you can't just have the chemistry. And I think we've lost the main CTL, and we won't have it for next year. So I think there will be more emphasis on Septoria rating especially, and I think people should really consider in this when they're choosing varieties this autumn ready for next year.
I mean, we're going to cover cultural control elements with you a bit later, but I should also say we've got varieties like Skyscraper, Heron, there's very, very high yielding varieties with lower Septoria levels. We can add to this in terms of cultural control measures by drilling them later, can't we? I mean, we shouldn't move away from some of these varieties if we de-risk them in the right way. Would you agree, Gareth?
Completely agree with you on that one, John. Yeah, so in those varieties, those ones that are a bit more susceptible to Septoria, really, if we do get a wet season, up in the north or in the west and things, then we are going to be struggling. But you shouldn't write these varieties off. They've definitely got a place, and we know with Septoria, if you drill a bit later, then the Septoria risk decreases quite a bit. So there is definitely still a place for those varieties with the lower Septoria ratings, like the Kering.
Cool, thanks. James, back to you.
Thank you, John. And so, I mean, looking now at Extase, there's a lot of hype about Extase in the market, and we're going to try and cover as much as we can here. In my opinion, this is one of the most popular varieties, and rightly so, in the UK at the moment. It's the ultimate risk management tool, as John is going to talk about in a moment. And I think every farm in the UK could consider Extase, which I know is a big statement, but let's have a look at it. I'll pass first to Kirsty because it is a Group 2, so we'll start with the millers.
Lovely, thanks James. So yes, Extase is a Group 2 variety. I think first of all, from a milling and baking perspective, a Group 2 isn't about being a failed Group 1. The Group 2 can be one of two things. It can be something that's used for a very specialist use in the bakery, or it can be something that's used across a range of products but not quite as flexible as a Group 1, like we've seen with Zyatt, that was used across those host of applications. So Extase is a Group 2, and the reason is because it is not sort of entirely used across the full range of applications, and that's because it has something called a lower water absorption, which means that it's not particularly useful in grists where you're looking to make the sort of low-end white slice loaf. Really good in high-end artisanal products that you get to see on the bakery a lot. So in terms of the grain spec, fully meets the Group 2 specification of 12.5% protein, 250 Hagberg, 76 kilos per hectare specific weight. And it's come from our French breeding programme, so inherently it's been bred as a milling wheat, and indeed in France it has BPS, which is superior bread making performance, but it also has something called VRM, who is basically the miller's gold stamp of approval, if you like. So a really good product, and we've seen a number of millers look at it. They are hoping to look at a lot more of it this harvest to see, how they can work with it a bit more. But we do know that there are buyback contracts out there, so it's always worth talking to your local home. Just got an example here from Haygates. They obviously buy Group 2s at full spec, 12.5 to 13%, but they also are offering fallbacks right down to 11% protein. So definitely one to be considered from the end use perspective. And we're now going to hear from Stuart, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the Group 2 prospects going forward.
I think, again, that will be determined by plantings and the potential premiums for Group 1s, in that, as you say, Group 2s will always trade at a small discount to 1s, but it's all to do with the supply. And if we've got a £15–20 premium for Group 1s, there's certainly a case for low grades, sort of an 11.3 protein, to trade at a useful premium. So I think Group 2s will have a good place, and certainly the reports I'm hearing of Extase, it looks very good in the field.
Okay, so I think hopefully we've left that a bit longer so everyone could hear Stuart's recording. We're now going to move on to the agronomic aspects of Extase. So John, over to you.
Well, thank you, Kirsty. Well, Gareth and I will tag team on this again. I think what's interesting is, these high resistant varieties have always been quite niche in terms of where they've worked out on farm and in the UK, and they've always had a trade-off in terms of grain quality. We now have a lot of varieties with good 6s, 7s for Septoria from all the breeders, and indeed Extase as an 8.1. So it's this variety is going to go in a lot of places. Now, the easiest thing to talk about is the saving on fungicide that can be made, and of course, with the most resistant variety, we should be able to do this as one of the cheapest fungicide programs on the farm. That's fair to say. But it all depends on the situation and the risk that you put it in. And dry Cambridgeshire is going to be a different septoria risk to the Midlands as it will be to North Lincolnshire or the middle of Yorkshire. So, it's about the risk that they face and when they drill them. So, it should be one of the cheapest fungicide programs, and I think we're quite comfortable talking about that. But also, it's going to need some looking after. We have been talking for a while about septoria genetics. When you have scores from, certainly 9s, 8s, 7s, and indeed some of the high 6s, from a breeding point of view, you've got major gene resistance in there. So it's one gene making a massive contribution. And you hope you have a nice foundation of minor genes that make it nice and robust. So there is an element, a bit like tank mixing, to keep the disease guessing and protect the chemistry. We also need to have an element where we start thinking about protecting the variety. And I think that's where, that's where we need, there is a reasonable spend level on these varieties. And depending on the risk, we don't really know where that will be. I think this slide just shows you what is perhaps considered old news. We feel as though it's probably more relevant now, this buying new time, because, a lot of sprayers are pretty hard pressed. A lot of farms are looking, doing liquid fert as well. And, weather conditions are changeable. Contract farms are further apart. There's a lot of logistics that go into spraying these days. And we know that we've lost the curative activity that we had 10 years ago. So we should be, we need to be better timed with our chemistry. We need to be in a more protectant situation because we haven't got the curative to save our issues. And I've been using this slide for the progression of septoria from 2017. For me, this shows exactly what septoria resistance means for a farmer. This is what it means on farm. So we have septoria DNA in the leaf. We have dear old Trinity, which was a 5 for septoria. Of course, when we're 10 days late, there's a massive increase in septoria within this leaf. We go to a 6 revelation, no septoria, a well-timed T0, but it's creeping in there and starting to get significant. Of course, we get to siskin, much less, and then when we get to Extase. So, there's a lot of flexibility that comes with this variety, and when you manage that with cultural control measures, Gareth, I think we've probably got a pretty strong product, haven't we?
Definitely, John. And just to take this a bit further, we've got some specific examples from this year. So we've been developing this over the past 7 years, and we've come up with this rapid disease detection tool. So as John has mentioned, we base everything we do with fungicide on risk, and if we wait to see the disease before we decide to spray it, then often it's too late. So we've got a couple of fields here on a farm, and it is in Essex with James Knott. And field there, you'll see there's field A and field B. One was sown on the 5th of October, so that's their red. That is a higher risk. And we know drilling date plays a big importance, so we've got one there. Field A was sown later, on the 5th of December, so that's inherently a lower risk. The field on the right, the B, was Extase, so again, that's green, that's lower risk. The field on the left was Kerin, a more susceptible variety for septoria, so a higher risk. So they both have the same weather conditions over the winter, both wet and warm, so that's an increased risk. And then dry March and April, so that's a lower risk. There's lots of different factors occurring here. And then we have a look and think, right, we can actually test now and find out how much latent disease is on leaf 2. So this is key when you go in to spray it. So you could say, well, which one of those is going to have the most amount of disease? And if we look at it, we sampled leaf 2, and here are the results. So the Kerin, as this, just ignore what it is, it's just how much septoria is in it, and the Extase is there. So Extase there in that scenario had a much lower level of septoria in it than the Kerin, even though it was sown earlier. So genetics has a massive part to play in this, John.
I think also with the loss of CTL and the anti-resistance, I think we're looking at the chemistry to help protect the variety, and I guess you guys are looking at the varieties to help protect the chemistry. Is that fair?
Completely agree with you. If we if we put too much pressure on the chemistry, it is never ever going to cope. So, you know, a more susceptible variety sown early, you can throw the kitchen sink at it chemistry-wise, and you still won't keep on top of the disease.
Thanks, Gareth. One of the other things that's quite interesting with some of the varieties coming through is this earliness, and we'll touch on it with Parkin, but ultimately it's quite difficult because to see what the value is to the farmer. And you guys will see, you know, maturity as, you know, the same as Skyfall, but actually we find it different. Now this is dry downs from our demo field in Cambridgeshire, and you can see Parkin and Extase and Zyatt coming in here, and they reach 16% around the 23rd, 24th, and the lilies and the siskins around about the 26th, 27th. So, you know, we believe there is more in the value of earliness than perhaps farmers get to see on the recommended list, and we'll just explore that a little bit earlier. I think there's two ways we can use Extase. We either use it as the example there, so in some of this earlier drilling, in the higher septoria risk, but then we're using the strong resistance and we keep quite an early variety in its first to the combine. Or we use it in one of the later drillings in a lower risk and we still have quite an early harvest date. James.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Gareth. Right, so the next variety we're going to look at is KWS Firefly. I think regionally this is a variety that will fit well. For those of you who are looking for a variety that's got the stiffest straw on the recommended list, there's been varieties such as Grafton and Lily that have really filled this niche in the past, and I see Firefly as a very, very good replacement for that. It's worth mentioning as well, we've looked at Septoria, and Firefly is offering, a 7 for Septoria, so it's the 4th strongest. So there's a lot of attributes that Firefly has that I think are going to work for you guys. It is also a group 3, so again, I'll pass to Kirsty and she can talk us through the group 3s.
Many thanks, James. So, yeah, obviously the Group 3 market, if you have access to it in your region, is quite heavily driven by the premiums that are on offer. So I'll pass over to Stuart in a minute, who will take us through that. But just really to talk about what a Group 3, a true Group 3 is from a milling and baking perspective. It's all to do with the ability of a variety to form a dough that stays in the biscuit shape, so that actually the same number of biscuits are produced 24/7 and fit in the same packets 24/7 on a production line. So really we're not going to look in too much detail, but just really to say that Firefly has consistently met the specification for a Group 3 over very different seasons. So here it's the resistance measurement is consistently above 100, which it needs to be. But more importantly, it's lovely and consistent in terms of its extensibility. So it consistently produces biscuits, shapes that are sort of 16 centimetres and over. And that's really looking back to almost the days of Consort and Claire. Claire was particularly good and particularly extensible. Maybe Firefly could be sort of a similar variety in that vein. So it's definitely something that the millers are keen to see more of and has worked very well in their products as we go forward. So the other thing obviously a biscuit wheat can do is export, and Firefly does that in terms of meeting the specifications for UKS. And one thing the exporters feedback to us on is the P over L characters are nicely below that 0.55 requirement that they've set, and at 0.3 it's really going to be a variety that draws some attention from the continental millers. But as I said, now we're going to hear from Stuart. He's going to talk a little bit about the Group 3 premiums that are on offer.
Yes, I do. But again, you look at the last couple of years, they've struggled to fetch significant premiums. But if you can get an extra fiver for these new Group 3s, which are right up there with the best Group 4s in terms of yield, then it justifies putting a Group 3. And I think one of the questions you had on your survey is, are you looking at a local market? And a lot of the local markets take Group 3 biscuit wheat. So it's not necessarily going to be so much for the export market, but the inland market will want Group 3 biscuits.
Okay, so hoping that everyone heard Stuart there. I'm just going to pass back to John now that's going to talk us.
Thanks, Kirsty. For me, Firefly is really interesting. I mean, if you look at the video that's playing, you know, it is thick full of ears. It's come top of early sown trials, and early sown trials for me, I know we don't generally do it, but early sown trials are always indicative of high tillering potential, the ability to stand and the ability to fill all of those ears successfully. And Zyatt and Parkin both do that in early sown trials. I put a selection, put a slide up here of looking at the risks from lodging. Obviously, you know, I put some rough guides for programs in terms of the lodging risk. We have a lot of varieties on the recommended list that are well suited to later drilling, and one of the sort of pleas from everybody this year, I think, is to think about the varieties you start drilling with. You know, this late drilled potential, you know, we've got very, very good vigor, very good speed of development, very much get out of go, you know, and and we've ended up with slightly taller varieties, and that's great because we are drilling later, and that's exactly what we need. But if your knee-jerk reaction to this year's weather is going to be to start drilling mid-September, you know, then you need to start thinking about the stem stiffness and use the right varieties in that slot. And the Fireflies and the Costellos and the Parkins will do that. And everybody talks, I put this up just to be controversial. I mean, everybody talks about, you know, saving this, that, and the other on fungicide programs, but nobody talks about the value of stem stiffness and the potential to, you know, to trim input levels in accordance with the relevant risks for the crop, James.
Thank you, John. So we're going to move now to our final weeks. We're going to look at KWS Parkin. So this is something a bit different, and again, some characteristics I mentioned earlier, stem stiffness, that I think is going to really appeal to this area of the country. I'll start with Kirsty and we'll tell you the story of Parkin.
Great, thanks James. Well, I mean, let's get it out there to start with. So KWS Parkin was up for recommendation last November but didn't actually get added to the AHDB winter wheat list. And the reason was that it didn't make the Group 4 yield target at that time within their trials. But I just wanted to show you that actually it is a decent variety in its own right. So here are our own trials at KWS across a range of sites across the UK. Here's the summary for harvest 2018 and 2019. And you can see here that the variety does pretty well in comparison with the other Group 4s that you may have come across commercialised at present. We've also got Grafton on this slide, and we'll come back to that later on. But Grafton might be a variety that some of you have grown in the past in your region, and that's why we think Parkin might be quite interesting to you looking ahead to. That's because it can actually be sown pretty early. This is the AHDB data, which is collected over a number of sites and seasons. And if you see, these are trials that have gone in before the 25th of September. What you'll see is that in its early sown slot, it really does a good job in comparison with those high-yielding hard Group 4s it's compared with there. I think whilst we understand that early drilling isn't something that everybody is going to be in favour of, what we're suggesting is that Parkin certainly should be your first to drill, even if it's not within that very early slot. So may have a real use for you on farm looking ahead to this autumn. But it's not just about yield, clearly. There are a lot of things that James alluded to that are really interesting about KWS Parkin, and the first being that we've kind of touched upon this with Extase, is that Parkin is actually really early to mature. If you're to look at the AHDB data set that they collected on Parkin, they would rate the variety at a -1. Compare that with all the other maturities that you see of varieties on the current RL, and you see there's nothing lower than a 0 at the moment. And if you think back to sort of 2012, about 15% of the market was made up of varieties that matured at sort of the -1, -2 phase. You'll think back to varieties like Gallant or Cordial or even Soissons, which gave this extreme earliness. And again, as John showed you on the graph before, this is some of the data that really reinforces that statement, that it is an early to mature variety from our own trials at Triplo here, showing it's the first to hit 15–16% moisture. But John spent quite a bit of time talking to agronomists and farmers across the UK and saying, you know, okay, it's a -1. What does that really mean?
Cool, thanks, Kirsty. Yeah, I mean, talking to people, you know, Grafton was an early driller, and obviously we do have black grass, and the main body of varieties has probably drifted a bit later than those examples that Kirsty gave. So we do have a gap between when early maturity wheats and there, and obviously as on the south coast it's a lot, it's a lot longer. As we go further north, then that gap does disappear a little bit, because you don't have the extreme heat to bring crops off. But realistically, we are, and the line here is where we think we are really we can't get July combining the other side of this line, but once we start going really north, July combining is probably less and less likely. So we think there's a good week's worth of combining there, and what we're suggesting with Parkin drilled earlier and Extase, drilled in the, quite, not as early as Parkin, but quite early. We are really going to be knocking on the door of the end of July, first few days of August in terms of harvesting date, and we feel that is very valuable. What we then looked at is how do we show this value? Ultimately, it was sort of, looking at combine output was probably the easiest place to go. And if you look at John Nick, the average combine output is 20 hectares a day. Actually, if you just take a nominal yield of 9.5 tonne, that's a hell of a lot of wheat that gets in the barn safely and in good time. We should comment as well with the Parkin and Extase and also the Firefly. Second wheat performance is good. Have no issues on second wheat. Eye spot needs watching on all varieties largely now. So yeah, second wheat performance, and if you've got that ultra earliness, then you've got the ability to establish oilseed rape, and that's quite a key thing. So for me, summarising Parkin, for those people who have fertility, digestate, or big piles of poo, anybody who really wants stem stiffness, then the list used to be quite big, whereas now there's probably a lot more varieties that they wouldn't choose. And I think that's where Parkin and Firefly really come in as being the varieties that perform on fertile situations. And indeed, it's worth looking at, your local trials, local recommended list trials. Parkin topped some of the trials on the silts and things around the wash in Lincolnshire. So it is very, very high yield potential, early drilled and in the right slot. It has got a 5.5 receptoria, so it's not exactly going to be, a cheap fungicide program. It is going to need looking after. But we do have very good yellow rust resistance, reasonable brown rust resistance. So, that side of the program is going to be a bit less risk. But the septoria obviously needs looking at. But, I think when you talk about the balance of features, we believe that Parkin has the right balance of features, and even though it didn't get on the recommended list, still has the potential to be a significant and useful variety on farm. James.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Kirsty. So that brings us to the conclusion of the wheats, and I'm going to pass you now to Julie Galt, who's going to take us through oilseed rape quickly. Jules, you there?
Thanks very much, James. I have just got two varieties that I want to speak to you about on the oilseed rape today. One should be very familiar to any of you that do grow oilseed rape. It's Campus. It was first introduced in 2014. It's very popular on farm, and the reason for that is that it is a consistent performing variety. Whatever the site, wherever you are, whether it's in trials or it's on farm. It's a very vigorous variety, and it has a good agronomic package. It has 6s for light leaf spot and stem canker, and has very good verticillium stem strike tolerance. It's a variety now that's probably been grown on about 350,000 hectares, so it's certainly well proven, and I think we expect to see it still being one of the most popular varieties for the coming year. The other variety to talk about is our new variety Blazen, which is a new recommendation for the north. It has short, very stiff straw with excellent standing, and again a good disease package including verticillium tolerance. One of the key points about the variety is that it's available on our Oilseed Establishment Partnership. If anybody wants to know anything more about the Oilseed Establishment Partnership, I'd ask you to go to our website where you can see how the scheme works and who our partners are.
Thank you, Jules. Well, just quickly, thank you very much to everyone for tuning in today, and thank you to all of our speakers. The screen has changed for yourselves. In the top left-hand corner, there is a link to our variety guide. If you click there, you can download it. All of the content, all of the information on all of our products is in there, but also, most importantly, all of our contact details are in there. So if you do want to get in touch with us, please feel free. We'd love to hear from you. Similar links there to Cereals 360, which is our virtual crop tour, and our website, and the Oilseed Rape Establishment Partnership that Jules has just spoken about. So we haven't had any questions in the chat so far, but if there's any questions you'd like to ask, please put them in the chat now. If not, I'll wrap up and it'll be bye from me, and we'll catch you at a later date. Thank you.